Hi there, and welcome to Pax Politica, the place where peace building and visual storytelling come together. We hope you enjoy this video, and if you do, please do like, share, and subscribe to our channel. I happened to meet somebody from Universidad Nacional as well. And he was telling me that a lot of under the table recruitment still happens
Yeah.
at Universidad Nacional. And I thought that was really interesting. In fact, based on what he told me, it was one of the few places where students, faculty members, having completely different opinions to each other, actually engaged with each other, had discussions, had debates, sometimes led protest movements. But there were other people I happened to speak to as well who were from right wing universities, Del Rosario, for example. And I thought that the differences between the perceptions that these people had based on where they studied was really interesting, was really fascinating. What do you remember from your time at Universidad Nacional, especially what was the dominant feeling among the students as far as the conflict was concerned?
Yeah, that was part of a big change.
Yeah.
I started university at 16 years old. Yeah, I came
2004, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
I came from this high school where I was more or less protected anyway. So it was like shocking for me, this change. First of all, because it's elite. No social, but academic. So we encounter people from the best high school from all the country.
Yeah.
So first, I felt stupid compared with all of them. Second, it was the feeling of being in a national space for real. So I have indigenous people in my classes, black people. So it was also the notion of Colombia is not just Bogota, but also at the political level. The first things that you saw is murals from different guerrillas, from different social movements,
Yeah.
and the assemblies, the protests every semester for different things, and I became involved in that. I was part of a social student organization at the end, and I knew about the existence of organizaciones clandestinas. I knew who were them, but I was never invited. But I knew, and I learned to be in the same place, even though we have like different perspectives, especially about violence and the use of violence. But it was interesting what you say, that we have really alive discussions in class and also in the assemblies about deep topics like how legitimate is the political violence or not, or how is the meaning of peace or justice, but still a lot in the theoretical level.
Do you remember any discussions becoming violent? Like physically violent?
Yeah.
Aggressive? Yeah? Can you share any?
I have a student colleague. He called himself a fascist,
Okay.
and he even painted his face with like white powder
Wow. Okay.
to look whiter. And he was in my semester.
Uh-huh.
And all the time he was, like arguing against the left wing and in favor of Hitler and things like that. And we were used to. We were used to that, and teachers too. But once we were outside the faculty, and two guys from, I don't know, like which left-wing organization came, asked for him, and punch him and kick him. And at the end, when it became more serious, we intervene
Yeah.
to stop the fight and say, okay, we are at the university, leave him alone. And it was funny because he was like covered in blood. He was losing the fight, and he still say like, you see, this is the left wing. I have told you. And we were like, shut up. We were helping you. It was like this time. But in my generation, the violence inside the university was more questioned. But I have colleagues and teachers that tell us stories from the past where, I don't know, right-wing professor say something and his car was stolen or was put in fire.
Wow.
Or, you know,
Whoa.
there was somebody from this combo,
Yeah.
left-wing combo, that have a fight with another, and he came with a gun and say, okay, we're gonna fight. So that was happening before ours, like in the 90s.
So it was
That was
so during your time, the university was a little less violent,
Yeah.
but it was aggressive anyway.
Yeah, and we have Las Pedreas, El
Okay.
Tropel.
Uh-huh.
Every month was quite often, but it became landscape for you. Like even when it's funny, like when you see it on perspective, sometimes we're like, please, God, give me a tropel today because I have this test and I have not studied. Please, I need the class be canceled.
Yeah.
And then many people went to see like seeing the movies. Now, again, when you saw in perspective, you are like, okay, this is it's part of the violence too, and it was natural for ours.
But in hindsight, when you look back at your time in university today, do you miss being at university?
Of course, that was part of my favorite times at life because, anyways, when I pass the door, when I cross the door, it feels like a independence territory at the city, for everything, for the good things and the bad things. You have culture, you have people from different parts of the country, you have also the possibility of use drugs without nobody bothering you, and you have this political discussion permanently, like research groups or in the squares, or we were very involved also in the political, the national politics. So when, I don't know, teachers start a protest, we were there, and we were the young people, the creative. So it was a time where a lot of things happened there, and I have so much free time, like never before. So we were all the time like producing theoretically, but also in terms of art, the organization that I was part at the end. And at that time, I wanted to be an actress already. So we proposed things like, we don't want to give the people like folleto with like
small letters and saying there is inequality in our country. 20 million people are in poverty, because I found it that bored and dogmático, sectario.
Yeah.
So we proposed things like, let's do a noticiero like Jaime did. So we did something, tried to perform in something similar to what Jaime Garzón did, and we did a 30 minutes program talking about the country and the problems at the university. We did clown sketch. We made a song about the financial crisis at the university, and that was part of my social work at the end at university. So because I had a lot of time to write the scripts, put it in place, and the National University was the perfect public to take these kind of products and ideas.
But then, when did you decide to become an actress, and why?
That was 5 years ago.
Okay.
But I had been close to performing, dancing, singing, and acting since I am
a child, because before the Jesuitas, I studied in an art school.
Okay, so one of the things that actually fascinated me a lot about Colombia, art and visual communication have always been extremely strong and deeply embedded elements in Latin American history when it comes to social movements, protests, demonstrations, human rights, etc. Visual communication through graffitis, posters, music, for example, have always been very, very important. So for you, when you were at Universidad Nacional, was art always a way of expressing yourself, or did you discover that side to yourself when you were at university?
I think a bit of both, since I have this curiosity about art since
Yeah.
I was a child and was supported by my parents too, who exposed me to theater, to museums. But at university, for example, I discovered the street art. I didn't made it myself, but I was always there, like bringing the water or the ideas.
Yeah.
Then somebody else's do it, the mural or things like that. Also, I remember in sociology, they have this journal that was fantastic. It was called El Pasquin. I remember that it cost 1,000 pesos. And the day that they publish it, something like every Wednesday, or you had it to be alert because it goes super fast.
Yeah.
It was very creative, funny. They have good like drawing, design, and it was very political too. Also like the theater, the dance, all the national official arts groups were very recognized at the country. And that was that. So I saw that, but also in the protest, I was always part of the communication committee because I found it bored to be at the assembly just talking or, in the discussion. So I found it that communication and arts were a way to make it funnier for myself to be in the social movement, for me. But also, I found that when we use these kind of languages, people want to follow us. People want to join us.
Yeah, yeah.
I remember also in one December that we were still in protest, and we have this in 7th December, El Día de las Velitas, and we were doing los faroles that were like Viva la Universidad Nacional, and then we sold them.
Yeah.
So people put their candles, and we, we did things like that. Or let's do a protest, no with walking, let's do it biking, and dress it with costumes. And that become more interesting to people, to normal people, to civilians outside the university, to join us or to empathize with our causes. So I discovered that at university.
Okay, so right then after university, or rather during university, do you feel that all the experiences you had with your peer group, the art groups you were a part of, the discussions, the debates, the faculty, and everything put together, do you feel that it changed or it affected the way you looked at the conflict in any way? How?
Yeah, like, first of all, makes me really conscious about the history behind the conflict. It was not just what I saw at the news, or even, the Jaimes there, the things that I saw in TV. So I have a class that was called Political Violence, like history, Colombian history. I remember also constitutionalism, where every topic that we learn, it takes us back in history and also into complexities. I think it opened my mind to how difficult was to to understand and to solve this conflict since his roots in equality, in history, colonialism, the land problem, university, and also the organization that I joined at the end. We have there a center that was called RAISAL, Instituto de Pensamiento Latinoamericano. And I was very young, but I have discussions with people that were already teachers and in other universities, and they have met the country, indigenous organizations, peasants. So they have a lot of information about how the conflict, but also the social resistance was lived for real in the territories. I use that work a lot, for example, because I learn with these people something that they call el enfoque territorial.
Yeah.
And we try to use it for the way that we approach our work at uni. So that was first thing in the theoretical level. But also I was too much into that, so I wanted to be like Camilo Torres.
Okay.
So I wanted to study French, to go to Lovaina and study there and become more expert in the theoretical level of understanding like social issues, let's say. So I went to Canada, to Montreal, to study French. But then there, I make myself conscious about the migration issue. And I don't know, it happened, this migration thing, that when you are far away, you become more aware and worried about your own country. And I was like, I don't want to go to Lovaina to study any theoretical thing. We have a lot of problems, like as Colombians, as South Americans, including migration and conflict. I wanted to do more practical. So I came back, and that was complementary to the theoretical. I have this call for doing something.
And what did you do then?
I was candidate from the local assembly in Bogotá. We have localidades. So I was living in Teusaquillo, and I ran in an election.
Okay.
Yeah, so I was very involved in El Polo Democrático Alternativo. That was the left-wing political party. And I almost get there.
Okay.
It was like 80 votes or something.
Ooh, that's close.
Yeah. But thanks to that, I always celebrate that loss, that defeat, because I was in a relationship, and in that moment he was in Santa Marta working with fishermen organizations that were affected by La Ola Invernal, because we don't have winter, right? But they call it like that. And we have this agreement that if I won the election, he will come back and be by my side, helping me with that. But if I lost, I'll go there. So I went there, and that was the final hit that I needed to know that was peace and conflict was my thing. Because in Santa Marta, we live toques de queda, we met real people that were direct victims from conflict, but also real people that have resistance process against violence. And I was like, this is the most important issue that we have to attend. Because anything that we tried to do, like this project was not related with conflict, but anything that we tried to do to help was always touching or crossing with the conflict. Right. And there I was like, this is if Colombia do not respond this question about the violence, we won't be able to do anything else.
You know, this is actually something that I really want to touch upon. So, as a teenager, 18, 19, or early 20s for that matter, and I'm trying to recollect how I was and how I looked at the world at that age. You know, it's one thing to study about peace and conflict theoretically. It's one thing to read about, oh, these many people died, or these many people were survivors and victims of the conflict. Today, we can see pictures of people and children who survive conflict, right? But you're not directly engaging with them. The only engagement you have is by looking at pictures in newspapers. At that age, when you were in your late teens or early 20s for that matter, you had a direct face-to-face interaction with victims and survivors of the conflict. What was that like? How did that make you feel at that age?
When I went to Santa Marta, I have 22.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was in my 20s. It was shocking and was very like changing. Like it gave me perspective about my privilege to be Bogotana, to live in a city, to study in that university, to be able to travel.
Right.
Especially, yeah, these fishermen, one of these organization was, they were victims of a massacre. And that massacre had the displacement, the forced displacement effect too. And was very impressive for me how they managed to survive with very less resources and to fight for being recognized as victims, but also as survivors. Their way of living shocked me, like their resistance, their resilience was for me, yeah, like gave me a lot of strength and power to feel motivated, to be resilient myself, because I
Right.
was like, these people have survived everything, a lot,
Yeah.
and they still have hope, and they still sing and make jokes. And I remember we did a mural, because one of the problems with this small area in La Ciénaga Grande de Santa Marta, they were palafitos, this kind of architecture
Right.
On the water. And since there were very few people, and most of them have left the place because of the massacre, La Gobernación del Magdalena said that they didn't exist anymore. That this corregimiento was called Bocas de Aracataca, they didn't exist
Wow.
in the in the office eyes. And one of the things that we did was at the entrance of the little town, we made a mural that says Bocas de Aracataca
Okay.
existe porque resiste.
Right.
And I remember those kind of that was beautiful, right? Because it was like they never thought about doing a mural, but we just became outside the uni. We did murals, and they inspired us to say that because it's what we saw. It's like, of course you exist because you are here and you have survived. And this kind of things that we did was this encounter between this resistant story and the few things that we knew from coming from the university and the city, and being sensitive and open to listen their stories too.
What kind of stories like really stayed in your mind and memory? Something that deeply, genuinely affected you?
In that time or
Yeah.
in general?
General, definitely, but in that time, yeah, surely. As a 22-year-old, I'm guessing you must have heard a lot, which really made you stop, think, and wonder. I mean, wow.
Yeah, I remember that like this small community, like working with people that all of them have at least one dead victim in their family.
Yeah.
That was something that I never was exposed before. Like even myself, I never had a relative that have died, even for natural causes. So listening when they talk about how their families were killed or raped, and in this natural way, like right now, like telling any story, that was one side shocking, but another side was again like inspiring, because people telling these stories from very strange perspective. No, like the victims that are crying and they need help.
Yeah.
There was more survivors. So that's also what I tell you about the el toque de queda, or the way that the city was built, the way that the people relate. That was also very shocking, because it was very influenced in that time from the paramilitaries.
Right.
And I can feel it, because I came, for example, the way I dress, the way I talk, it was questioned at the beginning from some neighbors, or, that made me notice it, that the paramilitary forces have won the cultural fight. They were able to impose, for example, they closed the theater. Yeah, most of the people have very conservative ideas about women, about, hippies, things that defeat their social order. And I felt it myself in a very subtle way, I didn't die, but I felt it, and it was, it was depressing for me, because my feeling was like they won, because people that were opposing this way of thinking, this social regulation, these cultural restrictions, were rather murdered or disappear, or displaced. And I was living in that post-moment, post-context, where they already imposed a new culture.
So, by your early to mid 20s, you studied at Universidad Nacional, you ran for elections, you went to Montreal to study French, returned to Colombia, and then you were part of a cultural group working with victims of the conflict in Santa Marta. What did you do then? What did you do in life after that?
I lived for 3 years
Yeah.
in Santa Marta,
Uh-huh.
but that was my basic, or my main place.
Yeah.
But because of the job was hard to find, so I was living for a while in Valledupar, Cartagena, Barranquilla. I was moving in the Caribe corner. And I did cultural things for myself, and trying to rescue these few traces from before the paramilitary times. And I went to I got this job that I was telling you before, in el Centro Nacional de Memoria Histórica, Dirección de Acuerdos de la Verdad. That was part from the transitional justice process with the paramilitaries.
That was a truth commission?
Yeah.
Kind of.
Kind of. I say kind of because it was a little department inside the National Historical Center that was in charge of interviewing paramilitaries from middle and low range to ask them from what they know and what they remember about the conflict in exchange of
Amnesty.
amnesty.
Tell me more about your time at the Truth Commission. You must have met a lot of people, or at least witnessed a lot of cases related to the conflict. What was that like for you? Was it disturbing?
Yeah, it was. First of all, because the moral responsibility. We designed a methodology, we a big group, a methodology where we use some criteria like correspondencia, consistencia, coherencia, suficiencia, and something else to decide if each person was contributing or not to truth. So that's very like, what? Like challenging. So that was first problem for me, because was, even though, of course, the decision was not only mine, I was just part of the process. Many people review the process before me and after me. But I was part of the process, so part of my criteria was influencing the fact that a real human being could go to jail or not, or could be contributing or not to the memory, to the victims. So that was like a lot of pressure. And also something that was very important for me was like, anyway, I still have more theoretical things in my head than experience. So I tend to, every time that I interview somebody, I make a new hypothesis, a new theory. And then next day, my theory and my hypothesis was destroyed, because the next story was way more complex than the previous one. It opened my political views too, because at that time I was very left-wing, sided, and I had a lot of bias because of that. And when you hear stories from people that when I was a child, my dad was at the ELN, but then he was called for paramilitares, and then my mom was in FARC, and was like things that show you that the war is not about some good people and bad people, and it's not simple. It's bloody, it's complex, and it have a lot to do with the social inequalities, with people that engage in the groups, not because they believe, it's because they have to, or because it's the only thing that they saw, but then they are revenge, love, funny stories in the world too. Sometimes you expect, or I was expecting stories, about the massacres, the homicides, and people want to tell you about funny things that remember how they felt the group was their family, how they miss be recognized for the people, how they also help the people. So it was very interesting, because it was every time to see that the war, the conflict, and the human being was way more complex than I thought.
Did you ever feel that the people you were meeting, the testimonies you were recording, there was a sense of denial among people?
Yeah, a lot. We have, in the method, we have two interviews. So usually at the first interview, we ask from our general things. We build a profile. And according to that profile, we make a hypothesis. Like, if this person was in this territory in those years with these responsibilities, at least have to know about this, and this. So the second interview was usually more interesting, because they came with the same attitude that in the first one, where they want just to talk about general things, not bloody things, and then we are like, okay, let's talk. And it was hard from a lot of them to revisit the bloody aspects, to talk about their own responsibilities. They were in denial also because some years have passed. So a lot of them wanted to leave that in the past. So when we came to revisit that, it wasn't pleasant. And also they have fears about the people that were about them.
Yeah.
They can, punish them.
But then, what were people more comfortable talking about when it came to the conflict? Was it, for example, what they had lost? Or was it, for example, what they had done themselves?
Comfortable about what others did, about why the guerrillas were the bad guys, how they help people, how they build roads, or things like that, that makes themselves also feel they did something good.
But you know what? One of the things I've often noticed among people who record testimonies of conflict, and I include myself in that category, was that a lot of people, victims and survivors alike, or those who have even committed acts of violence, they often feel and they argue, what is the point of us giving you our testimony? Nothing is going to happen. You will not do anything with it. Instead, we will give you our testimony, and it will only go as 1 or 2 lines in a piece of paper on a report. And nothing will happen with that report at all. Did people come to you with this kind of criticism as well?
Yeah, even myself. Because sometimes it becomes frustrating, have this great amount of information. I know that there are going to be reports, and there are reports about it. They have published many books to explain some of the dynamic in the regions, how the groups were created, who funded the groups, all of that. But sometimes for them, and also for me, was like, but how this contribute not to the general history, the general memory, but to me? Yeah, they question that. Like, or they question the fact that also like the power dynamics, right? Like most of them, they were like the low levels. So they were still poor, they were still without power. So they were like, and the bad guys, the real bad guys, aren't you giving these interviews? So they question it.
And how did you resolve this confusion, this discomfort within yourself? Knowing that, okay, the people I'm talking to have questions, have concerns about what is going to happen with my testimony. But then you have a job to do as well. So how did you come to terms with that confusion?
I think by doing my job, a good job. I was very rigorous. I took a lot of time doing researching, contrasting sources, trying to not let my left-wing view or my emotions during the interview, because some of them, they challenged me during the interview. So with this kind of people, I was really like, okay, I have to take some time to meditate, to take apart my emotions, how I felt, to try to do my job the more objective way possible. And sometimes I have this form where I can put my observation, and I put a lot of there to let them know I had bias about this person, because I don't know, this day I was tired, it was very hot, things like that. And also I think to live in the heroina. Like I was not doing this job to save anybody, which is part of, I think, was something that have saved me from this idea of, I'm not doing this to save anybody. I'm doing this because I have interest in this. Because it's not my place to save rather the victims or the country or the memory or the peace. I'm just like a small part of a big process that is not up to me, or it's not just up to me.
And after working with the Truth Commission, did you then move to working with the HEP?
No. I went to Cali.
Okay.
And one of the reasons was because that was really exhausting to do every day. Yeah, I quit because I wanted a change. And I wanted a change to work with more like the positive side, let's call. So I went to Cali. I worked with Javeriana University. They have Intercultural Studies Center. And they work with the South communities, indigenous, Black people, peasants. Yeah, it was like working with other side of the conflict, the ones that are in resistance, the civilians. I think I was worried to be empathizing too much with the bad guys, with the combatants. I think I was looking for, like being close again from the perspective of the one that have suffered more. Because that was good, because of course the ex-combatants are human beings too and have complex stories and all of that. But the ones that have suffered more in this country are the civilians. So I was there 2 years, and I worked with in Buenaventura with a river that is called Yurumangui. It's a Black community, and also with peasants and indigenous people from Cauca. So I saw this perspective, and was very important to see the peace initiatives that they have despite the government, the armed groups, wherever, like all the things that they do from their freedom and autonomy, despite having or not resources or support to do that, and that was very interesting.
After spending almost 10 months in Colombia, working on peace education, meeting ex-combatants, etc., as you said earlier, human beings are complex. It's made me realize that it's not always a matter of black or white. People are fighting and supporting their own values, or values that they believe in from time to time. So why was it problematic for you to feel that you were sympathizing with people who were committing violence when you were with the Truth Commission?
I think I was tired. I was tired to receive like the sad part of the history. It was taking hope from me. It was uploading me with a way that it wasn't mine. And
Yeah.
I started to feel like I'm empowered, that this is a lot of violence and a lot of things that I cannot fix. And in my character, I'm very pragmatic. I'm solutions team. So I think that was part of what I needed, like
Right.
to work in something that I was able to intervene directly. Because memory, truth, that's important. But it starts to feel frustrating for me, because memory and truth are like long-term politics and
Of
issues.
course. Yeah.
And sometimes leave out the specific change or the particular change.
So you were then working with peasants and indigenous communities in Cali. What was that like? How was that part of your life?
I think one of the happier times of my life, one of my favorite jobs, especially
Really?
I
Okay.
become very attached and close to that community of Yurumangui River in Buenaventura. Because before I have met indigenous organizations, peasant organizations, women, but it was the first time that I was so close with a Black community, and gave me another perspective about the social movement, but also about our history and how important is the contribution of Black community to our history, and how is despite all the violence and colonialism connected with Africa and with my own story. I felt Black myself, part of me. Like, I felt my mestiza was fulfilled with that experience. I was like, I am this too. And that was amazing also because they have this social resistance to conflict using singing, using like environmental initiatives that are very effective and very beautiful and give me a lot of hope about how they protect their territory, how they use the humor to survive, the dancing. So they are very alive community that resists also to guerrillas, paramilitares, army. And yeah, for me, that was like very inspiring. I'm still in contact with them. And for me, it's one of the most important places and organizations, social movement that I have met ever.
If you enjoyed this video, please do hit the like button and subscribe to our channel. At Pax Politica, we tell stories throughout the world of peacebuilding and human rights that aren't covered by mainstream media. And every bit of support from you would help us do exactly that. So hit that like button and share the video with your friends and colleagues. We'll see you next time, and thanks for watching. See you in the next one.